Hello, guys. Welcome to a very special update tonight of EFA Catching Up with Education. And tonight we're going to take a special focus. We're going to focus on some of the legal questions that we've had around critical race theory. And specifically tonight, we're going to stay on the issue of critical race theory. We have a lot of questions about mass, etc. But we're just going to talk about CRT, especially in light of the fact that today, the Senate in North Carolina passed Bill 324, and that Bill 324 is an anti-critical race theory bill that seeks to protect the civil rights of students in North Carolina to be free of, racial segregation, stereotyping, collective punishment based on their race and their gender. It's a very important day. We hope that the Governor Cooper won't veto it, although the signs point to he will do just that. But I want to introduce John right now. And he's got an unusual situation, but John is with Schoolhouse Rights. And actually John's specialty is education, specifically critical race theory. So it's an honor to have him tonight, especially because he's in New York right now and quite literally caught in the middle of a hurricane. So we may have some spotty interaction for sure, but welcome tonight, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, and I'm happy to talk about the bills, including the North Carolina bill. I can talk. They're getting better and better. The bills, the first couple ones that were passed were a little broad, and that doesn't mean they won't get upheld by the courts, but the courts might winnow them down and strike certain clauses from them. But the North Carolina bill is good. What it lacks is teeth. You can't. It doesn't give parents a private right of action. And as far as I know, none of the anti-CRT bills do. So parents can't sue on these bills. They can at most make a complaint, and then the state officials, like the board of the Department of Education, can then investigate, and they can take action. So it's the success of the bill, even if it's passed into law, is conditioned on you having a friendly state Department of Education, a friendly state governor, and you may have one now, but you may not have one in a couple years. But they are good. They give a great template of what's wrong with CRT. You should use that language, cut and paste, if you're writing a letter to the school, especially the North Carolina bill, about what sort of actions you won't tolerate in your school, what sort of pedagogical activities, you're going to demand to be put on notice for, et cetera, et cetera. So they're actually an instructive read, a good guide for how to fight CRT.
Great. So they do give us a guide, and for our viewers, let me tell you what I like about it and what's kind of in it. Really, it's a recitation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In other words, don't stereotype, be nice to others, the like. But what it's got in there is it's got a transparency mechanism, and it goes like this. So parents have, a right to look at what the teachers are going to be teaching, the curriculum, not the standards, but the curriculum, about a month ahead of time. And, at least in North Carolina, and I'm sure, the teachers union types all over the country, they're rebuffing at this. They're saying, wow, this is a hassle, and how dare you look into our classroom? But listen, let us not forget that, an arm of the government, all right, happens to be teachers, happens to be schools. We know this because they don't allow prayer in school, right? It's the same thing. So, a lot of the arguments we've made here, of course, we're no lawyers, but when we're talking about this, John, what we've said is, look, why can't a dime of our money go to, towards prayer in school, for instance, with the Establishment Clause? but it can go to racism. Why is that? And that's our chief objection. And that's kind of our premise when we argue here. What do you think?
Yeah, if I could just say one great point you raised about the North Carolina bill and what distinguishes it a lot from other bills around the country is it does have that disclosure element. And that, at the end of the day, what the schools and unions are most scared about is disclosure and discovery. If you sue them and they have to pay $100,000 in damages in 3 years, their insurance company is going to pay for that. It's no skin off their back. What we want is disclosure about who's funding this curriculum. They don't want you to get into inner office emails between Department of Education officials and DEI contractors. They don't want you to see how the sausage is made. And then they don't want you to see what they're actually teaching to your kindergartners, your first graders, who aren't necessarily going to be able to come home and accurately describe what happened in class. So the disclosure element of the North Carolina bill is absolutely clutch. And you should keep in mind that your discovery, figuring out what actually happened.
So John's going to go in and out just simply because of the weather. And so again, 324, it has passed the Senate as we thought that it would. And that's in no small part because of all the work that Mark Robinson has done and Senator Phil Berger has done to kind of get it over the finish line. So what John just said is what we've been working on. We've been working hard on it here. Illinois, where we're really pushing, Arizona and Texas, and we're working on handling critical race theory at the state level. So in other words, our investigations here in North Carolina and beyond are really focused around who's funding what. So as I told you, before, we've done some reporting on foreign funding, even big money going to possibly people that are on a state school board, and us having all kinds of trouble. The proverbial excrement hit the fan with us. But you're right, John. They meaning people in power, whoever it is, right? They don't want you to know and understand what's going on and what kind of money is changing hands. But listen, transparency is for the government. Privacy is for the citizen. And because of all this critical race theory and all the money and the influence in this process, that has gotten flipped around. And we see copious amounts of data are coming, John, from our kids by way of surveys where parents may or may not know. Usually they don't. And we don't even know who it's going to. And that's become a real problem. And so, John, we have something called Schoolhouse Rights. Not Schoolhouse Rights, excuse me, Schoolhouse Shock. I almost forgot. But it's a mechanism by which parents and teachers, we're getting a lot of it, they're able to kind of give a confidential complaint to us. We are lucky to have a governor who also has his own task force. So we've been able to take a lot of complaints in. And what we do here is we kind of put them in two piles, right? This is really horrible, but no rights have been violated, right? And that could be material that is being taught, but there's no compelling someone to do something, right? And then there's the other stuff where it's like, wow, we probably need to see what a lawyer thinks about this. And so that's what you're on here tonight for. And so, free speech, it's so hard to govern, even as a teacher, even as a government employee. So what is that point where a teacher's right in the classroom ends and a student's right begins?
Yeah, that's a good question. So public school elementary teachers, they're not like university professors. They don't have First Amendment rights in the classroom. And also, whatever they're is generally regarded as government speech. It's official government speech. It's policy. It's curricular speech. Held to a high standard. It's held to the strictures of Title VI, the Bill of Rights. It can't discriminate. And it also has to, a teacher's speech has to serve a pedagogical purpose. Once it starts veering from the subject at hand, for instance, if the teacher starts teaching CRT in math class or science class, the courts are going to bring a higher level of scrutiny into what it is the teacher is saying. Usually, courts give very broad discretion to schools in what they teach. However, this stuff is just a different animal, and I've had success in my lawsuit, particularly because we showed instances where the teacher was compelling speech. So if the students are forced or even encouraged, I wouldn't get too hung up on the mandatory optional distinction. If they're encouraged or compelled to reveal certain things about their identities, that right there it's both a violation of privacy possibly, and it could.
Okay, so John's popped out again, but the privacy thing, I can't wait till he comes back on because we want to talk about the privacy. One of the things I want to ask him is about the surveys. I mean, talk about privacy. I mean, there's something called FERPA, which is a federal law which guards privacy of the student, and PERFA, which is another privacy instance for the student. What we're having here in North Carolina, we're seeing it in Illinois, we're seeing it in Arizona also, are these surveys. So, John, you last left us with the privacy thing, and what we're wondering and what we're seeing is a continual flagrant devil may care attitude about violating FERPA in doing some of these surveys. Are you finding that? And then after you answer that, I want you to talk about your case with our good friend Gabby Clark in Las Vegas, or not? Yeah, Las Vegas, I think. But tell us about that case also.
Yeah. Well, I guess the important point about Gabrielle Clark, aside from the fact that she's brave, and so is her son, is that both she and her son collected and preserved all the curriculum information that never would have been disclosed by the school. So that gave us the evidence we needed to file pretty quickly. We didn't have to do FOIA requests for 6 months. Gabrielle Clark actually requested information about what was going on in the class, and the school refused to provide it. Fortunately, she and her son had already preserved a lot of the material, and it showed numerous instances of violation of privacy, asking students for a grade to reveal their identity, and then to assign discriminatory labels to those identities. So right there, an assignment like that it's a violation of privacy. They have to disclose their identities, their racial, sexual, gender identities. Then they have to label those identities. So in a pejorative way. So that right there is discriminatory, because some identities get labeled as oppressor, which is insulting, and others don't. So that implicates sex discrimination, racial discrimination, and they did the same thing for religion too. And so that would implicate the First Amendment Establishment Clause. The government has to remain neutral on matters of religion. It can't slap labels like oppressor and privilege on one religion or the other. So all of that gave us a lot to go on. Also, the class was just stupid and heinously racist in the illustrations it used. And if you see that, just taunting, alienating, racist messaging, that creates a hostile environment. So there's another claim you can use. A lot of information I have about this, you can find on crtattorney.com.
All right, so we have this up, and I want to show this. You've got some very good things that are illustrative of what you're talking about. And actually, we have this in North Carolina as well, where it's almost like, children are being obviously taken advantage of because they're young, right? They're having to implicate themselves in some crime by virtue of their gender or their race or their religion, which is exactly what you're talking about, right? And so here is a wheel. Let me see if I can really kind of zero in on this. We're seeing a lot of this, you guys, a privilege pie, okay? And I think I distorted it, but basically it's sort of like the Matrix, you guys, that I've shown you guys over and over again. That's happening in North Carolina, where you're having students, in some case, fourth graders, fifth graders, they don't understand privacy and that they're entitled to it, or having to implicate themselves. Are you white? Are you Christian? Are you straight? Even they're being asked. And so on down the line, they're having to, in essence, stereotype themselves and implicate themselves in some supposed, I don't know, crime or something like that. That is a definition of compelled speech. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, if the assignment is graded, or even if the assignment is encouraged, or if the kids are so young that they can't distinguish what's mandatory and optional, and they just do whatever the teacher says. As far as I'm concerned, for children of a very young age, everything is mandatory. That's directed from an adult. That's just the way they are. So those privilege wheels and that we just saw, which are in almost every curriculum and teacher training, they're especially discriminatory and actionable for a lawsuit when children have to fill them in, when they have to put in each slice of the pie what gender they are, what religion they are, and then assign the label of either privilege, oppressor, or power to those identities. And you're seeing these exercises crop up in math class and English class. They're completely unrelated to the subject at hand.
Homeroom, we're seeing it, art, and we're talking too tonight about critical race theory in general, but it's also coming in through something called SEL, or social emotional learning. And what you said, something very interesting in the beginning, is that it has to serve a pedagogical purpose. And so what's happening at the top, at least in North Carolina and in Illinois, is at the top level, at the state level, the purpose is social emotional learning. So that's really affective conditioning or psychological conditioning, and it's really something called brainwashing. So they're using the same techniques as really in brainwashing, the isolation and the confessionals, which is what you're talking about. And so having kids write continuous autobiographical stuff, asking the questions, answering it, that's not just so that kids can get used to expressing themselves. It actually has a purpose, a manipulative purpose, because when children are confessing very intimate details about their lives, about their families' lives, that's an invasion of privacy. And that information can and will be leveraged by teachers or others to manipulate these kids into doing things that possibly that they don't want to do. And so it's a practice in North Carolina that's coming from the top down. We see it in social emotional learning, and we very definitely are seeing it in the social study curriculum. And we'll have a very in-depth expose on that on Monday, how the curriculum is actually the standards in North Carolina are actually as applied using the same technique as brainwashing. And of course, when you get into little kids, obviously you have a captive audience, which is in this country, government schooling is mandated, or schooling is mandated. And so in essence, the government has a captive audience, which is why these offenses are so egregious, because if you don't have the money to get out of it, you will be abused. And that's what we're seeing. And that's why you need to know what your rights are.
Yeah, that's right. It's important to know what you can take to an attorney, or what you can put a school on notice about. I know a lot of parental organizations are getting enormous amounts of materials.
Right, and we are. So what John is talking about is this: evidence is key. So we work with a lot of parents, really from all over. And I think the number one mistake they make, believe it or not, and it's an easy mistake to make, is that they don't have evidence. In other words, they go to the school board meetings, which great, wonderful job to do, but they don't have the evidence. And so here's what that looks like: they show up and they come onto the scene and say, "I know critical race theory is being taught. I just know it." But they don't actually have the evidence. And to your point, John, they don't know how to match the evidence up with the actual predicate for a lawsuit or the actual civil right problem. And then the second problem, or second issue that a lot of parents, have, and the problems and mistakes they make, is not actually knowing where the problem comes from. So, John, what we advocate for here is that, let's say that you've got, a teacher who is teaching that wheel of privilege. As a parent, you need to find out where that's coming from so that it can make it more actionable. If it's just a teacher who learned it at a training, okay, we'll find out what that training was. Did the district offer it or the state? Who paid for it? And that way we know where it's coming from. Always follow the money, John. That's what we talk about here all the time, because that's really, generally how you're going to get at the root of the problem. What do you think about that? And what are some tips that you can give parents for what are they looking for in evidence preservation?
I missed that last question from you, but I did, we're breaking up a little bit, but I did hear you mention, social emotional learning. And I think that's a tool that justifies them to use it with increasingly younger ages of students, and also to direct critical race theory at special ed or IEP students who have special needs issues, and they're especially vulnerable, and they're the last people who should be exposed to this stuff. And I think by labeling and characterizing CRT as some sort of therapy, it allows them to direct it at some of the most impressionable, vulnerable types of students, the very young, and also maybe students who are cognitively impaired or emotionally fragile. And I think that's one reason why they're trying to disguise CRT as SEL. Also, there's more money in teaching special needs students than other students, so it's more lucrative if a contractor can get into populations of students who are special needs. There's greater funding, there's greater money going around. So that's what I would say about SEL.
Okay, great. And then, school boards are very important, John, but what we're encouraging people to do is, when you have a problem, you need to go at the state level also and figure that out, because you can solve all the problems that you want on the district level. But at least in North Carolina, Illinois, and California, and Texas, we're finding that that's not really doing a lot, because when they have things, they mean in the state level, when they have things that they have to have the districts fulfill, a lawsuit can look very different, right? If you're suing the district, it's a lot different than suing the state. And so we need to find out where those things are coming from. And then the last thing, because I know you need to get going because storm, and thank you again for joining us. But the last thing that I want to ask is that this push for transgenderism, in North Carolina, we're seeing it, hold on to your hats, in preschool, in state-funded preschool. They're pushing this ideology. We're seeing it in first grade. They're pushing this ideology. What is actionable pushing this?
Everything. Treat that as a personal injury action. Accuse them of having amorous designs on your children. Why else would adults be so morbidly interested in the sexuality of small children? And then take it to a jury. I guarantee you a middle-class jury wouldn't be too tolerant of this kind of curriculum being exposed to children. I mean, it's semi-criminal, and I believe you should sue on it. It's a breach of the duty of care. These teachers are custodians of the young and the vulnerable. For them to start poking around about gender, not only is it a violation of privacy, but given the age of the students, it can induce sexual confusion. It can inflict trauma. Uh, these instances should be litigated, in my opinion, when CRT is directed on the very young. um, you know and I would encourage parents to take their children to a counselor, a psychiatrist who's independent of the school, um, and make a record of any trauma that the child suffered. There's lots of instances of this in Tennessee.
All right. So we've been reporting on things that are going on, like I said, preschool, kindergarten, et cetera, that these vendors, these companies, they think that it's a fad. They think it's a fad, maybe even a profitable one, to push this transgender ideology. We've seen it with the unicorn, the gingerbread man, I don't know, they've got a teddy bear now. We've seen it in all manifestations, but exactly right. And John, we've called exactly what you've said, grooming, because it certainly appears to us that that's what it is. But again, at the state level, they're pushing it also.
Yeah, well, they're pushing it at the federal level, and CARES Act money that schools are getting for COVID relief is semi-conditioned on them providing mental health and SEL services to students. So it's tied into the COVID relief. It's in the core curriculum. So there's pressure coming federally. There's pressure coming from the state. And there's pressure coming from, interested private parties, whether they're big publishing houses that want their books to replace traditional curriculum, or whether they're just quack charlatan DEI contractors who are trying to make a buck. So, those are the
right, and those are the sources. So the ESSER funding, the COVID funding in North Carolina, that is going to pay for critical race theory teaching for teachers, so that they've got to sit through these equity trainings. In Charlotte, we know in that particular district, they've had to sit through 5 of these trainings in a 9-month period in Charlotte. And to think that it is not trickled down, or the implication is it's not to trickle down to the students, is ridiculous. We're just talking about the ESSER funds. We've got in North Carolina, we've got a superintendent, an elected superintendent, who is not being honest at all about those ESSER funds coming in to essentially, John, start mental health clinics in the schools. Some of that money goes for what's called telemedicine. And the age of consent, get this, the age of consent in North Carolina and that means how old you need to be to consent to have mental health treatments on you, is 0. California, the age is 12. North Carolina, it's 0. So conceivably, you could have one of these. And by the way, John, it's done on the basis of equity. This mental health is done on the basis of equity. So we're talking Dr. Mangala stuff here potentially. You've got healthcare providers, access to a whole bevy of patients. Some of them, many of them, don't have the age and maturity to consent, and they don't need their parents' consent.
Yeah, fortunately, some states have greater protections. New York, for instance. But you're absolutely right that these ESSER funds have all these provisions about mental health, and so that's really feeding the coffers of these SEL providers. And so there's a lot of COVID money funding mental health /SEL/CRT. So that's the world we live in. Funding is conditioned on teaching SEL and CRT.
Yeah, and I want to be
But
clear, by the way, the mental health, oh, sorry about that. The mental health, John, that's being provided, and this is an important distinction, you guys. It's not mental health for those that need it. It's called a universal program. In other words, it's a dragnet. Everybody gets the same treatment. Everybody. So it's one thing to say, hey, some kids are suffering. We understand that. This is treatment, like it or not. You can't opt out. Megan Hightower Dyson, you cannot opt out. You want to know why? It's in every freaking class, be it homeroom, art, math, basket weaving. They've actually put it in to all the classes. So, John, you're right. You have to catch the instances of it happening, have the evidence, and sue. Because it's not something that you can opt out of. It's not something that you can at all opt out of. So, John, I'm going to let you say some closing. Okay, he must be gone now. So I'm going to let John come back on and close this out. But the thing is that you honestly, this SEL and the mental health and the money, I mean, the hundreds of the millions of dollars in North Carolina that's going into putting essentially mental health treatment centers in, copious amounts of money here, copious amounts of money. And so there's also one thing I want to ask John about is, will you be able to even sue the folks that are doing this? Because a lot of times the people that are doing this stuff, in other words, the professionals, the doctors and nurses and social workers especially, they don't have liability when they're practicing inside the school. And so there's a lot of crossover. And unfortunately, it's going to take suing in a lot of these instances for your civil rights. So I just want to recap what John has said. Compelled speech. He said something interesting, that students that are really young, let's say 5th grade and under, maybe even 6th grade and under, when the teacher says something, that could be construed as implied. So if a teacher says, hey, fill out the survey, kids want to please the teacher, right? So they'll fill out that survey. That's compelled speech. That's a violation of civil rights. So that's one thing. And then the other thing I thought was very interesting is it subjecting your child to all of this transgender stuff, especially at a young age. Child abuse. Amy, who vets the psychologists? Are their sessions monitored? We don't know. And I got to tell you something. The lack of transparency coming from the DPI is unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable. We don't know where the funds are going. We see in the paper where it's going. In other words, we know from the documents where the funding says it's going. We don't know actually where it ends up. We don't know. And in fact, I wonder if there's, Amy, now that you're asking, I really wonder if there's a way to kind of get a roster, if you will, of mental health professionals. But parents, here's what I want you to do. Tomorrow, I want you to go and see what your policies are. So if you go to, I don't know, Smith Middle School, I'm just making it up, figure out who the counselor is, what the protocol is, and if they have telehealth inside of the school. Because again, the age to consent is 0. You do not need parental consent, even at 0 in North Carolina. So you may have a 5th grader that's going to a psychiatrist is prescribing drugs that you don't know about. Do not say that it can't happen, because North Carolina is set up to be that way. There's a lot of money in this. And again, I keep telling you guys, we have lobbyists on the inside of DPI. They're influencing also the type of vendors they're using. DPI can choose who they contract with, etc. So we also have to get the funding and people like lobbyists and their spouses out of the DPI, so there's not preferential treatment, right? Because if you're getting copious amounts of federal funding and you're giving special favors to people in your family or people that you work with, we cannot have that, right? We've got to have absolute transparency and fairness in this whole process. So I think John answered a lot. We're going to let John go because, quite frankly, he's caught in a hurricane. I think we can cut him a break here. Yeah, so parents notified of sessions. Nanette, we've had 2 complaints over the last 6 months of parents not being notified of sessions with a psychiatrist. Here's how it happened. A survey was done. This is one instance. A survey was done. This is to a 5th grade class. And about an hour after kids took a survey, came a knock on the classroom door. Little Johnny was called out. sent it to the principal's office. The principal said, hey, I want you to meet with a mental health professional. That student did meet with a mental health professional. Parents were not called the entire time. That mental health professional gave the child a diagnosis of depression and recommended medication. When the mom found out about this, when Johnny could actually tell the mom called and said, what the hell is going on? Who is a mental health professional? What happened? The school would not give them the name of the person the child talked to, would not give them any details. So it's, first of all, it's the offense. It's having children have to go through this alone. Think about it. They're going through this, if they're being targeted, by themselves, right? And then when the parents are calling, they can't get a straight answer. We hear about that stuff all the time. The lack of transparency is insane. The lack of respect for parental rights and privacy is also insane. Yeah, and more exposure. Oh, RJ, thank you. No, you're seeing a counter on one of our channels. We're on about 6 channels, and we get an average of 6,000 viewers within a 24-hour period. So this will be videotaped and shared. So, but to that, RJ, we need to share the hell out of this one, right? We need to understand what we're looking for. Evidence is king. Right, you can go back through our recorded stuff, but again, sharing is the best way to get all this stuff out. Yeah, Charlotte elementary schools are the worst. You have to get permission, etc. Hey, to break this to you, Janet, we have heard a couple of instances where in Charlotte, not getting the parental permission, not at all. That's not happening. In Wake County, I can tell you it's not happening. So, you know, that's going on. Also in Pitt County, that's not happening. So it just seems to be a bit epidemic right now. And so what you need to do is tell your kids, hey, listen, do not fill out any surveys. Unfortunately, you're going to have to start young, maybe 2nd or 3rd grade. Sit them down, tell them that it is not appropriate for a grown-up, even if it's your teacher, to ask you any information about your brother, your sister, your mom, your dad, yourself. Great, Megan, petition for Governor Cooper not to veto the indoctrination bill. Guys, copy it down, look at it, copy it down, get it out. Yeah, we need all the help we can get, Megan. Thank you. So thank you for joining. Tomorrow night, y'all, let's kind of make some noise for Dr. James Lindsay. I cannot believe that he will be on with us tomorrow night, 9 p.m. He is the preeminent scholar on critical race theory and social justice issues in schools. He's everywhere. He's like the granddaddy of them all. Extreme expert tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Do not miss it. Share it everywhere, 9 p.m. tomorrow night. Thank you guys for coming on tonight. And look, if you've got any other questions, we're always here. We're happy to forward it to John. We're also working with 3 other legal teams who are looking at issues right now in North Carolina and figuring out which direction to go in. Can't tell you a lot of the stuff that's going on, but I think some things are happening and moving in the direction where there will be some lawsuits filed in the short term. So thank you very much. Thank you. All right. Good night, Susan. Good night, everybody.